So we saw a quick definition of IKS, Indian Knowledge Systems. Let's also quickly look at a broad level what it contains. Let's quickly go over it. If you look at the IKS corpus, we can broadly divide them into two, as I was already mentioning. One literary part and the other is the non-literary part. That's one way we can first start dividing this corpus. Now, if you look at the literary part, one major chunk is what I may call it as Sanatan Dharma corpus. Okay? And in that, even in that Sanatan Dharma corpus, we have certain subdivisions we can think of. The first thing is the core Sanatan Dharma literature, which has the Veda and the Vedangas, because that is a fundamental building block of Sanatan Dharma. So that basic text, I call it as core scriptures. Then in Sanatan Dharma corpus, the other part is where we have a lot of interesting things. You have mathematics, you have astronomy, you have aesthetics, for example, engineering and technology. So many things are there, and they are all, I call it as Sanatan Dharma other division, because they may all be aligned to the principles of Sanatan Dharma. Just to give you an example, in mathematics, when they talk, in astronomy, they talk about year and so on. They will align to the ideas of Yuga cycle and all that which is there in Sanatan Dharma. So it all draws from there. So that I call it as the other set of corpus. And then you have what I call it as, other than the Sanatana Dharma, there are other literature knowledge in this country, which if I call it as Sanatana Dharmic or other Dharmic, if I were to call it. I think two significant elements of them are Buddha and Jaina. They have some interesting material also on mathematics and things like that. So that is the other possibility. And then in all these, there is so far when I say Sanatan Dharma, by and large they are written in Sanskrit. That has been the primary medium of communication. As English we use as an official language today, at that time Sanskrit was the official language for transacting things. So Sanatan Dharma literature was mostly in Sanskrit. But there is a voluminous corpus in regional languages, which have either they retell the ideas in Sanatan Dharma literature, improvise it, contextualize it and so on. So that's another big chunk of corpus that we have, and all these form the literary element of IKS. Then you have the non-literary element, which is called oral traditions, and as I was telling earlier in one of the earlier videos, the oral traditions are in you have health traditions, you have something on art forms, you have 64 kalas and many more. So this is the other part of the IKS corpus. So we will very quickly go through a bit of it. If you take the Sanatana Dharma other literature, then you have ideas on basic and applied sciences. You have mathematics, astronomy, plant sciences, Vriksha Ayurveda and so on. You have ideas on engineering and technology, metalworking technology, shipbuilding, dams and watershed management. Alchemy was one big area. There was always this fixation of converting any metal into gold. That's where alchemy came actually. Then cosmetics, perfumes, dyes, town planning and architecture, all these are there. Health, wellness and psychology, in terms of Ayurveda, there are these three important works, Ayurveda, Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita and Ashtanga Hridaya. They provide a wealth of information on health and wellness. You have the philosophical systems such as yoga and Sankhya, etc., Upanishads, Vedanta, etc. They all talk about psychology. You have Niti Shastras, which informs the society of good code of behavior. You have Rajaniti and Samanya Niti, things of that kind. The Samanya Niti deals with elements of good living, ethics and morality and so on. On the other hand, Rajaniti deals with public administration and governance. Of course, we have literature in Sanatan Dharma on aesthetics, kavyas and performing arts. It's a very voluminous literature. I don't have time to talk about it, except to say there is a rich contribution there. Whereas if you take Buddhist literature and the Jain literature, they have contributed significantly from 500 BCE, from the 5th millennia of the, before the Common Era. Of course, there are a lot of religious and philosophical part of the literature which is based on the respective tenets and so on. But the other literature has applications in areas of science, technology and others. For example, Buddhist works have mathematical concepts, maritime activity, shipbuilding, alchemy, all those are part of good literature is available in Buddhist works. Similarly, in the Jain literature, you have, for example, in the Buddhist literature, just to give you an example, the work of Nagarjuna called Rasa Ratnakara in the 1st century CE is a very early contribution in alchemy, as I told you, mathematical concepts and so on. Whereas if you take Jain works, of course Jain have their sacred literature of canonical texts, but mathematics was an integral part of many of them. It is called Ganita Aniyoga. A portion of their literature is dedicated to mathematics. I remember, they several 6th century BCE, I think, there is a number of 2 power 96 when they tried to establish the number of species in the earth and so on. You have Tattvartha Sutra composed by Uma Swati during the 2nd and 3rd century CE, which is a very important Jain literature. But in addition to all these, Jain texts also deal with mathematics. Things like Aniyoga Dwara Sutra, Vyavahara Sutra and Surya Prajnapati and so on. There is a very famous mathematician called Madhavacharya. His work on Ganita Sara Sangraha in the 9th century CE is a very significant contribution in the field of mathematics in India. So, this is how the literature that you see. If you look at the core Sanatana literature, our Vedas and so on, there is a beautiful classification scheme there called Chaturdasha Vidyasthana. Chaturdasha is 14. So, Chaturdasha Vidyasthana is a 14-part classification of that literature. That's also available. The way it works is the 4 Vedas, and of course there are Upavedas and all that form 4 components. 6 Vedangas are there. So, 4 plus 6 it becomes 10. Then the next classification is called Puranas, and of course Itihasas are also part of it. That makes it 11. Then Dharma Sutra, Shastras and Smritis are one chunk, which is the 12th one. Then Nyaya in its detailed form, which means Nyaya and Vaisheshika. We will see all of them as we go along, a little bit detail. So, that is the 13th component. And Mimamsa, which means Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa, which are all nice philosophical texts. So, all these make up this 14-part classification called Chaturdasha Vidyasthana. Let me conclude this talk with a very nice comparison of Chaturdasha Vidyasthana with a modern idea, so that we understand how this classification system has been thought about. Let us take Income Tax Act 1961 as an example, or the Constitution of India. Also, similar examples we can take. If you take Income Tax Act, the bare act will be only just about a few pages. It's simply section 1, section 1.1, section on, simply it will write only the act. It's called bare act. It will run to maybe 40, 50 pages, 60 pages. Now, there will be a second text called Guide to the Income Tax Act, because we don't know how to apply a section. Section 80G, I don't know how to apply it. So, it will say, it will detail it out. When will you get exemption? What are all the documentation you should do? How do you apply for it? All those have to be written down. So, that is the second part. That will run to a few thousand pages, maybe 3,000 pages, because it has to give all the explanatory notes and so on. That's called the Guide to the Income Tax Act. Then there is a growing literature called case laws, because even with so much of written literature, when you actually apply it, sometimes you don't know. You will need to get it clarified. So, you go to the court will actually clarify this has to be done like this and so on. So, you have a rich repository of case laws. Now, you see exactly the equivalent in the Chaturdasha Vidyasthana. Equivalent of the bare act is the Vedas. The Vedas are the core text for this country. The equivalent of the Guide to the Income Tax Act is Smritis and Dharma Shastras and so on and so forth, because they actually detail out how to actually use the Vedic ideas of injunctions, how do you put it to your daily life and practice and so on. And equivalent to the case laws that you see in modern parlance is Puranas and Itihasas, because they actually explain how people actually tried it and what happened to them. That way it clarifies how things happen. So I thought I will just share this, because these classification schemes are very interesting. They map very much to what we are doing today. So with this brief introduction, I think we need to move on. All that I want to do to complete this discussion is to also tell you the historicity of Indian knowledge systems to the extent we know. I will do it in the next video. We will see it in some detail. Thank you.